Sangwaya Disa Scano, Tatewai, Nantohon, Nitwayasta, and Woodland Cultural Center, Nay Mohawk Institute Indian Residential School, Wayasta, and Nahon, Banagri, Jungwahonwe. Taiho Sneakwas Gaso, Nanto, Nagri, Nantohon, Shwe again. Here in Windsor, Nay Ganyatani, why was shot down, Nay Ganyatani, was shot down. Good afternoon. My name is Amos Key Jr. I just spoke to you in my language, thanking you for coming to the Woodland Cultural Center, formerly the Mohawk Institute Indian Residential School. And it gives me great pleasure to open our commemoration today with some words of wisdom from my ancestors. It's a Thanksgiving address, and we teach this now in our schools so that we have some basis of who we are from our genesis as being sky people from the star world to now in this great civilization that we have that we called Ongwehonwe civilization. So we want to share some of those words from our ancestors to bring our minds together and to celebrate, I hope, a great commemoration from the minister. And I'd like to thank all of our guests for coming from the province, from the federal government, and joining us here today. So I'll recite this in my language, which is the Kinga language. I mentioned also that I'm a Mohawk from Oshwega, but for some reason my parents raised me in the Kinga language. They were multilingual, and I'm struggling, like all of us, to be bilingual. So we just want to share some of those words in my language, and it's just a great opportunity to share that with you. I know as we move on from today, we want this country to become more civilized. We can't say it's been that civilized in the last 150 years. But I think in recent events, we are moving down that path, that journey to become more civilized as a people in this country. Neki, ona hangasawe. I'll start now. Go senyo di wat taonyo nanse nyongtrit na wat initially. Go gon handway what can't to na to assess no guy what dek banohonyo. Nati always at scano do not onyo. Dikin dwe heki here scarred and doing and what go on scarred but at no honyo. You can't your tongue what go on song. And down and wa choice sound once a day to know how they went home qua. Lake what was sending her. Nating paid than honyo. You can't your tongue what go on. And down and wa choy hondoy hondoy touch snake is that. Now how I hate maybe he wakened it to honyo. You again your tongue what go on song. And down and wa choy gain a good doggy hotokia, you know. Nate young kitchen don't get snanto Wednesday. Then he quakened it in your gain a good doggy hotokia, you know. The young key and you don't need again your tongue what go on song. And down and wa choy said Wagawanya Scania Dio or who wanna taught was and a scanner he went short in your day. Then he quakened and honyo said Wago walk on. Nanto Wednesday to get your tongue what go on. And down and wa choy hunger to knock with some wire decent. Nate on to sent down scanner I do not know. Nate he greater than honyo, how get to know great some wire decent, and again your tongue what go on. And gone it on the god when Ike had guy again that a brief one egg is scanner on white horse and what's putting up in now what mystery net and what or no down it. So I just wanted to share some of the elements, those tenets of that Thanksgiving from my ancestors. We like to, first of all, bring our minds and our hearts together for this occasion, and that we're going to be thinking about the same path together today. And then we thank all of the elements, all of the bounty that we have around us, from the green grass right up to the sky world. We want to thank all of those that give us our sustenance and our livelihood and our, whatever gives us our birth and our courage. We want to thank all of those elements that give us our ability to sustain this world and to sustain our own lives. So we give thanks to all of them, from the fruit, the bounty of our vegetation, to the animal lives that we have and that we've domesticated. We like to thank them for bringing that forward. So we thank the Creator for that, for bringing us here together. And then we thank the Creator for sending us in our theology, in our spirituality. We have these tenets of four beings. These four beings, or holy people, help us guide our decisions. And we like to thank them for coming and being messengers from the Creator. So we give thanks for them as well. And then we thank from our ancestors, a chief. His name was Skanya Dayu. He was a prophet. And what he did was he brought us all of the tenets so that we could live with our younger brothers and sisters who are coming across the water. It was prophesied by our people hundreds of years ago that our younger brothers and sisters were going to be coming across the great water to be with us, and how we're going to live in that relationship with him, and how we're going to change as well. So we'd like to thank Skanya Dayo, Chief Handsome Lake, for bringing us those prophecies and how to live and conduct our lives with our younger brothers. So we thank him for that. And then finally, we thank the Creator himself. He lives up there, the beautiful land in the sky world. As I said, we are sky people. Our Genesis tells us we are sky people from the stars. So we'd like to thank him for bringing us, all of us here today, and having a great day together. And I ask also the four beings that I spoke about earlier to take our hands and guide us home safely to our loved ones and to our homes after this event. So Nyawakoa, thank you very much.
Nyawakoa Amos. My name is Janis Monture. I am the Executive Director here at the Woodland Cultural Center. And we're standing today in front of the former Mohawk Institute Indian Residential School. Before I begin, I want to say thank you first and foremost to our survivors who are sitting, some of whom are sitting with us today. And I'd also like to welcome our various delegations with us. I would now at this time like to invite the Honorable Catherine McKenna, Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, to provide remarks.
Thank you very much for the opening welcome and prayer. Do many announcements in my job, and this is probably the most important one that I will do. It's probably also the hardest. I would like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Brantford is situated in the Haldeman Tract, land promised to 6 nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. There are many people here to recognize, but first of all, I'm going to recognize the survivors. The strength that you have shown by telling your stories has been extraordinary, and I can't imagine how hard it is for you to do that. But it is so important that Canadians understand what happened at residential schools. It's in a sign of progress. This morning I was in Hamilton with my dad. My parents live, and he started talking to me just unprompted. He didn't know I was doing this announcement about the horrors of residential schools, that he could not believe it. My dad's an immigrant from Ireland. He didn't know the history. I also didn't know the history. I'm from Hamilton, 34 kilometers away. The only way I found out about Mohawk Institute residential schools was going to CBC. And everyone who's watching, please do this. CBC has a little app where you can go put in your postal code and you can find out the closest residential school to you. So I found out it was Mohawk Institute. And I feel really fortunate because this Canada Day was obviously, I think, a very challenging day for Canadians because we have a lot of reckoning to do, given the horrific legacy of residential schools, of assimilation imposed on young children. But I came here with my 3 children. And the good news is, actually, kids get it. They're learning more in school about residential schools. And I had a chance to visit Woodland Cultural Center. And it was amazing. And a huge thanks to you, Janis, but to your whole team and to the whole community for coming together and telling, yes, the horrific legacy that we all need to understand what happened at residential schools. And I'm very happy. Every community has to make their own decision, but the community decided that you want Canadians to come in and hear the stories of what happened here. Hear the story of Dawn and Roberta. Dawn was number 54. Roberta, I think you were 34. Not even using your names. And I can't even imagine that when you were 5 and 6 and your first night at the school, you decided to sleep together because you were scared, and that you got beaten the next day because of that. No hugs, an environment of violence. These are the stories that Canadians need to hear. It is not easy, but we do need to hear them. And I know there must be a lot of trauma. So to the Indigenous peoples who are suffering yet again through the discovery of unmarked graves of children, I know there's probably not a lot politicians can say, but our government will be there. We will support you because we have to. There's no choice as a country. And it is so important that we educate Canadians. So now I'm going to come to the happy part, because there is a happy part to this, that the community has come together and said that you want to continue to tell the story, that you want folks, Canadians, to know what happened at Mohawk Institute Residential School. And that's why I am happy that we're stepping up. The Government of Canada is contributing over $7.6 million for Phase 3 of the Save the Evidence project at the Woodland Cultural Center, which will help rehabilitate the Mohawk Institute Residential School site. And we're following your lead, because that is what we need to do. We need to listen to communities, and we need to support you. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce que le gouvernement du Canada investit plus de 7,6 millions de dollars pour la troisième phase du projet Save the Evidence du Woodland Cultural Center, qui contribuera à la réhabilitation du site du Mohawk Institute Residential School. C'est seulement en partenariat avec les peuples autochtones des provinces et des territoires que nous pouvons poursuivre notre travail pour faire progresser la réconciliation et faire en sorte que les communautés autochtones aient accès aux outils nécessaires pour réussir et assurer le bien-être de leur population. So I'm the Minister of Infrastructure, so I like talking about what's going to happen in building things. This project is going to involve restoring the building's masonry, restoring and replacing over 100 windows, and upgrading the building's accessibility and HVAC system. But much more importantly, this project will allow the site of the former Mohawk Institute Residential School to become a national historical site where all Canadians can learn about the horrific past of assimilation imposed on Indigenous children and their families, and we can participate in reconciliation and healing. Because only by hearing about the horrific past and acknowledging it can there ever be true reconciliation. I was with Chief Bellegarde. Well, actually, I texted him the day when I announced I wasn't going to be running again. I said, how do I start now? My acknowledgement to the land, but also my acknowledgement of what happened. The legacy of residential schools, of assimilation. And he said, tell people that the Truth and Reconciliation report showed us the mountain. And now we've all got to do the hard work, the climbing. I'm really very pleased that you've accepted me here today, given the horrific past that the government was part of. And we will walk with you in this journey. And I just really do want to thank the survivors, because I can't imagine how hard it is. I can't imagine being a kid going to school taken away from your families. That you share this very painful period is really extraordinary. Thank you. And I have to thank a friend who's been here. Well, first of all, there's a number of people. I realize I have a whole list of people I didn't acknowledge, but I do want to acknowledge Pam Dama. She's a good friend, a colleague, member of Parliament for Etobicoke North Burlington. Did I get that right? I got it right. Oakville. Okay. She's a member of Parliament. And she has been working really hard to make this project happen. So thank you very much, Pam. We have a great team, and I really appreciate that. Chief Hill, it's great to see you in person, and also it's great to see your community doing great things. If you don't know about this project, the Oneida Battery Storage Project for the Six Nations of Grand River is an example of a game-changing infrastructure that we need, because climate change is real, but also partnerships with Indigenous peoples that create wealth and jobs and economic opportunity. I have a number of other folks here. Of course, we can't do things without working with the province. So thank you very much. I'm trying to see. I think I've got Phil McColeman, who's here, and I think the deputy mayor is here as well. Number of other folks. But let's just keep on keeping on. I hear you need another $1 million. I will do everything I can to help you get that. But anyway, thank you. This is actually, as I said, the most special announcement that I've had a chance to make in my career and in politics, and I'm sure it will be that way. I will end remembering this announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister McKenna, for your words. At this time, I would like to invite Pam Dama, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services and Member of Parliament for Oakville, North Burlington, to provide remarks.
Thank you very much. And just before I begin, I'd like to thank you for inviting us here today. And I have a gift of an offering of tobacco for you, Janis, and sweetgrass for you, Chief Hill. Well, this is a good day. You know, as an elected official, it's not often that you get to do something that is so transformational, and I'd like to thank Minister Catherine McKenna, my friend and an incredible Canadian and parliamentarian, for making this happen today. Thank you also to Janis, Monture, Chief Hill, Amos for the lovely Thanksgiving address, and the survivors. I just want to thank you for being here in a place that it does not bring warm memories to you, and the fact that you were able to be here today. We're incredibly grateful to you. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. And I'd like to extend greetings and messages of fellowship and friendship from Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller and Crown and Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett, who couldn't be here today. The Woodland Cultural Centre, as you know, works to preserve and share First Nations culture, languages, and art. I first met the folks from Save the Evidence campaign at a performance of the Mush Hole in Burlington in March of 2020, just before our world changed. I found out why it was called the Mush Hole, because the kids were served oatmeal that was often cold and often had maggots in it. And since that first conversation, back in March of 2020, I've supported the vision for the museum to document and preserve artifacts from across the region. This center generously invites visitors in through educational programs and tours, and it's a gift to share this knowledge with outsiders and help Canadians who need to learn more about residential schools, while also offering a healing space for the community. The federal and provincial funding being announced today will assist the Six Nations of the Grand River, Wada Mohawks, and the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte to fulfill their vision for this center and restore the building in order to establish a national cultural historical site, if that's the route that you wish to follow. This funding also responds to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action 72 to 76. This initiative has from the beginning been led by First Nations and supported overwhelmingly by the communities in order to fulfill the needs of healing from the wrongs of residential schools. The Government of Canada is committed to advancing reconciliation in partnership with Indigenous communities. Today's announcement demonstrates that continued collaboration between Indigenous communities and the federal and provincial governments results in the creation of opportunities where Indigenous peoples can lead the way on the path forward to achieve reconciliation. Much work remains, and $1 million, but today's announcement is another step taken towards reconciliation. So thank you for being here. I'd like to now welcome Will Boma, Parliamentary Assistant to Ontario's Minister of Finance and Member of Provincial Parliament for Brantford, Brant. Although maybe I did that wrong. Janis, are you coming up first? Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Pam. Much appreciated. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I guess I wanted to begin by saying thank you to Amos, and also thank you to the survivors. It seems to me that we live in a world today where many want to tear down our past, and I completely understand the reasons why. And yet, I have to say thank you to the people that are here who made the decision to preserve this place so that we could learn, so that we could see. And as you can see behind me, the little shoes and the orange flags. And so I am so pleased that here in Brantford and Brant and Six Nations, we do not forget our past. We remember the good and the bad. So I would like to thank Minister McKenna for taking time out of her busy schedule for being here today. Pam, of course, I already mentioned. Chief Mark Hill, thank you for being here. And also Janis for the tireless work that you've put in there and always being ahead of the curve and planning for the future. I'd also like to thank my friend Phil McColeman for being here. And I have to say to everyone here who works as staff, you know that we as elected officials are no better than the people that work for us. And so I have to make special mention of Darian, who I know put so much work into this project to make this work through Phil's office. Thank you, Phil, for having her there. So I would like to thank everyone else who's also come here to mark this important announcement. Now I'm here in my capacity as a local MPP, and I like to say in Toronto that I am the only member that represents 8 nations, and I will let you figure that out. But I'm also here on behalf of our Minister, the Honourable Kinga Surma, Ontario's Minister of Infrastructure. Today is an important day for the Six Nations of the Grand River and for all First Nations across Canada. And as we mourn with them and relive some of the pains of the past, We continue to strengthen relationships with our Indigenous communities. Actually, not our Indigenous communities. I apologize. The Indigenous communities that we have the honor to represent, to support healing, and to make reconciliation real by advancing initiatives that will make a meaningful difference in the lives of Indigenous people and our communities. Today, Ontario is investing more than $1.8 million for Phase 3 of the Save the Evidence project for the Woodland Cultural Centre. And as we've heard already, this investment will go towards restoring the building's masonry, replacing windows, upgrading the HVAC system, and finishing interior restorations, including flooring and fireplaces. Improvements also include accessibility upgrades, such as the addition of a barrier-free main entrance, which as you can see is needed, an elevator, and accessible pathways around the building. The work will allow the Woodland Cultural Centre to restore the former Mohawk Institute residential school site, allowing it to open as a National Historic Cultural Site for public education and healing. Restoration of the former Mohawk Institute residential school site is a critical step in the Woodland Cultural Centre's efforts to save the evidence. The Government of Ontario continues to explore opportunities to deepen Ontarians' collective awareness and understanding of the legacy of the Indian residential school system. We continue to take steps to ensure Ontario is working with residential school survivors, their families, and Indigenous leaders on a community-led approach to advance meaningful reconciliation. And as we advance to meaningful reconciliation, it is important that all of us in Ontario continue to deepen our collective understanding of this dark period of Canada's history. I would like to sincerely thank members of the Woodland Cultural Centre, the Six Nations of the Grand River, and our municipal and federal partners here today. Thank you.
Now MPP in Boma. At this time, I would like to invite Mark Hill, Chief of Six Nations of the Grand River, to provide remarks.
Sego, Scano, good afternoon ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. I'd also like to start by acknowledging and thanking Amos for starting us off in a good way with his words, as well as I'd also like to begin by acknowledging and thanking all of our survivors who are here with us today, and would just like to say nyawa to each of you, as it is truly an honor. I would also like to say nyawa to Janis, Monture, and Trudy Porter, Executive Director and Chair of the Board of Directors of the Woodland Cultural Centre, which is doing such important and intensive work to protect our community's historical and cultural awareness here at the Mohawk Institute. I'd also like to recognize Minister Catherine McKenna, MPP Will Bauma, MP Pam Damoff, as well as MP Phil McColman. Six Nations has a long and rich history, and as the largest First Nation in Canada, we have a unique ability and duty to tell our story. The Mohawk Institute is one of the sadder and more challenging parts of our history. This place was the earliest and longest running residential school in this country, operating for 142 years. The intent was the same as at so many other similar sites across this country, which was to change us, to make us someone other than who we are. Today's announcement is one more step towards true reconciliation in this country. This building will be used as a tool to better equip us to educate the world about what happened here exactly. This important step, the third phase in the Save the Evidence campaign process, has been made possible by the contribution of the Government of Canada as well as the Government of Ontario, who are together giving $9.4 million. The Mohawk Institute was unregulated and unaccountable from the start. As the TRC said, the federal government's failures were responsible for the neglect and mistreatment of our children that resulted in unnecessarily high death rates at residential schools. And this failure of the federal government was built on top of an earlier crime: the forcible removal of our children from their parents, families, and communities. Given the federal government's role in establishing the Indian residential schools and in imposing mandatory attendance for our children, it is appropriate that the federal government make this gesture today. But we must never forget the support from our community and from our survivors, whose voices we must always listen to first and foremost. This is a multi-year process, and on behalf of the Six Nations of the Grand River Elected Council, we are truly honored to be able to commit to supporting this project and look forward to its completion. We are also working hard to support the community and our survivors as we begin the solemn journey of investigating the grounds of this site in the hopes of recovering all of our children. We know that the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation has said that 52 children died right here, but there was no mention of where these children were buried. We need to find all of them. Our next steps in that journey will be announced in the coming days. And in closing, as we have said before at Six Nations, we will continue doing what it takes to protect all of our children and provide a better future for the coming faces of tomorrow. Once again, nyawa to our federal and provincial partners, to Janis, Trudy, and all of the team at the Woodland Cultural Center, and most of all, to our community, and in particular, our survivors. We honor you, and we will never forget that every child matters. Thank you, and nyawa.
Now we go at Chief Hill. At this time, I would like to introduce Trudy Porter, Chairperson of the Woodland Cultural Center Board of Directors, to provide remarks.
Good day. My name is Trudy Porter. I'm from Six Nations. I've been involved with Woodlands for probably 14 years. And I'm not a speaker like the rest of the people here. I'm new to this, so bear with me. So with this funding, we are that much closer to realizing our dream of opening up the former Mohawk Institute Residential School as an important interpretive heritage site to educate Canada and to uncover the truth. The Woodland Cultural Center was able to raise substantial funds for Phase 3 in the amount of $378,437 through individual and community donors. As chairperson of the board of directors, we are happy that the broader community has actively supported the aspirations of the center, ensuring the preservation of the Mohawk Institute Residential School as a heritage site dedicated to honoring the memories of its survivors and ensuring that it is a place of learning and remembrance. Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the Mohawk Indian Residential School restoration was generously supported through funding from Six Nations of Grand River, City of Brantford, Government of Canada through the Cultural Spaces Program, and a major Phase 2 contribution from the Province of Ontario, in addition to generous donations to the Woodland Cultural Center Save the Evidence campaign. Again, thank you to the Honorable Catherine McKenna, Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, Will Boma, Parliamentary Assistant of Ontario's Minister of Finance and Member of Provincial Parliament for Brantford Brant, on behalf of Minister Kinga Surma, and to the elected Chief of Six Nations of Grand River, MP Phil McColman, and John Utley, Deputy Minister of the City of Brantford, for your continued support. Most importantly, thank you to the residential school survivors and their families who continue to guide us through this important journey. Nyawa.
Now, Ms. Porter. Before we go to closing, after the closing, we will take a short media Q&A, so I'll just ask you to leave your questions until that time. I would like to bring back Amos Key Jr. to close us out with the Thanksgiving address.
Yeah, but excuse me. I just want to acknowledge the team that we put together when we created Save the Evidence as a campaign, and we launched it some 5, 6 years ago. And I have to tell you, the Woodlands Cultural Center had a community engagement, did a major survey of all of our people. My offices, I was here for 35 years in leading the recovery of our languages here. And my office used to be on the 3rd floor. And that's what triggered this whole momentum to restore the building. It started to leak. So we had to move to the 2nd floor. So in the meantime, we did the survey. Janis and her team went and polled the community. Should we gut the building, let it go to rot, blow it up, or try to save it? And a resounding response was save the building. And I had a meeting with the survivors. I had a meeting with the elected council of Six Nations with Chief Ava Hill, and we started down this path. And I also met with my Jewish brothers and sisters as well to try to understand the Holocaust. We had meetings here in the library with my Jewish brothers and sisters to understand the translation of the word Holocaust as well. So we did our homework with going down this path to restore this building here behind me. And Janis came back, and it's been going ever since. And I asked one of the elders, a survivor, Aggo Hill, and we were standing in the parking lot one day, and she says, we looked up, and she says, Amos, we gotta save this building. No one will appreciate what happened here if we simply have a plaque. So that gave me more passion and power, hearing from a survivor, Aggo Hill, and she told me this is what we have to do. So we tossed around, save the evidence, save the witness. So we said, if we save the evidence, we save the witness. If you save the witness, you save the evidence. So that's how we came up with this marketing tool about saving the evidence. That was 6 years ago. So now we really appreciate all the announcements today, getting us down this road. And the next thing, when I'm in my circle with academics, I always say, this will be Canada's first Canadian Museum of Conscience, a CMA. A Canadian Museum of Conscience. And that's how we talk about this era with my academic colleagues. And they appreciate that. They understand it. So I'd just like to end with that and thank the survivors. I come over and visit with Jerome on the weekends. As a result of what happened in Kamloops, I live right next door, that building over there. And the traffic here, almost every day into the evening since that time, and on weekends, Geronimo has come and greeted them, and he gives them the story. So I'd like to thank Geronimo for doing that. He's volunteering Saturdays and Sundays and Friday nights sometimes, sharing his story on behalf of the survivors. So I'd like to thank him as well. So we have a lot of great people working here, trying to move this forward. As was mentioned, the city stepped up. I would like to thank personally Chief Ava Hill for giving me the push with her council to start Save the Evidence. So that's a little bit about the history of how we got here today. There's a lot of hours of meetings, as you can well imagine, and we're going down the right path, double checking everything. So I'd like to thank everybody, and I'd like to thank Janis, of course, She's my leader, and from the Cultural Center, I'd just like to thank her for taking his lead and I guess risking it too, I guess. There's risk in this, but I think we've done it. We've done it. So I'd like to thank you all for coming. So I'd just like to close in my language and send you all on your way safely. Kau sanyo di buat kasongo sa buat townyo sa ni Austria sa ni Austria ni na Woodland Cultural Center ni Mohawk Institute in the residential school. Kau going to the way who can't on it yeah. To Santa Kai what you can know make the own that scan out to nothing. Needing it way he has Scott and white and go squad to turn on your don't want to go home. And down and water, Troy Hodon, who do not touch snakes, Sahawan hate, needing to go into no honor again, your talk, want to go home. So, and down and water, Troy. Gain a good dog, do here, you know, then you can do this nato once a day. Needing needs to go for one scan your diet again, your talk, want to go home. So, and down and water, how get to Nagas some white diesel. Nate on to Santo scanner, I do not know. Needing it way he has Scott and why go home, Scott, but I don't know, can't go home. And down it on the guard, when the Ike had Gaya Ganta, Ganahono, a great what they is scan on some white horns and home was putting you in that was on the years, in that one yesterday. Down it. Thank you very much.
Now we'll go at Amos. At this time, I'd like to take some questions from the media. Yes, so phase 3 will commence very momentarily and will run until 2024, so over a two-year period. Any other questions? Yes. So I can't hear. Yes, so this is all new funding for phase 3, which we have been fundraising very hard for several years, so it's amazing news today, yes.
Just a quick question about the Chief mentioned searching here as well. Just a little bit more about that.
I'll ask you, Phil, to answer this question.
My apologies, can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So earlier you were mentioning how you'll have more details about checking here as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So again, it's we're making sure that it's survivor-led, getting our direction from the survivors and our community. The plans, we've been working extensively, putting a group together, forming that group and what the search will look like, developing our plans, being very strategically and methodically in terms of our next steps. So at that point in time, in the coming days, we're looking to provide more information. Yeah.
Oh, yep.
So is this all the money that you need to actually move forward with phase 3? Because I remember on the site it said something like phase 3 was 11 million, and you needed to raise 500,000, so...
Yeah, so with a combination of the federal and provincial funds, along with the donations we've received to date, as well as a contribution of $100,000 from the City of Brantford's Cultural and Heritage Built Fund, and S.E. Johnson, it will total just under 11 million for phase 3, yes. Yes.
In what ways will the community maintain control over programming and what happens with this site now that it's a National Historic Site?
As stated, we haven't received National Historic Site designation yet, but everything that we move forward in is guided through communications and consultation with the residential school survivors of this school, as well as with our support communities of Six Nations of the Grand River, Waka Mohawks, and Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. And so programming is still in line with our mandate and vision, and this will be a part of that moving forward. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, have Mark answer. She's asking about funding for the ground radar.
Yes. So we are working with both governments for specific funding. It is a proposal based from what our initial meeting with Minister Bennett's office was. We requested the initial $10 million to begin that. So that's still also very much in the works with the plans that we're also coming up with. Yes, we're hoping to start the search as soon as possible. Thank you.
We want to give thanks to you for your work and contribution to Mohawk Institute. We also know that there are other schools in the region, Monture Residential School, also called Mohawk Institute. We need to talk to you because the children that have worked are tremendously around this area. So thank you for this contribution. Our nation, your nation, it was wonderful. My mother went to this school, and what you're doing is just tremendous. But we also got to think about the other schools, and it's not just an hour and a half away from here. Maybe consider it at some point. Pretty much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much all for joining us today on this really important announcement. If you are looking for hard copies of the press release, you can see Layla over there for the hard copies. Thank you again.